Enemy at the Gates gets history wrong. Hey everyone, this is Jaxie, and if you want to know the myths this movie puts forward and what the real story was, then this video is for you. I'm going to address some of the bigger themes and mischaracterizations in the film, but I won't be able to go into every inaccuracy, so this video doesn't end up longer than the film. Enemy at the Gates tells the story of Russian sniper Vasily Zaitsev and his legend of the Battle of Stalingrad. The way it does this, though, focuses a lot on political messages and less on the actual history, and so the film makes a lot of missteps. At the start of the film, we see the man with the rifle shoot, man without the rifle follows trope. Vasily himself gets stuck with one stripper clip and no weapon, and one of the first pieces of drama is him trying to get a weapon so he can fight. Problem is, it wasn't really like that. While some units like the 13th Guards Infantry Division were short of supplies going into the fight and did have to cross the Volga in daylight because they were desperate for men, their own records state that they worked to get rifles and ammunition before going into the fight. Many primary source accounts talking about ammunition shortages were units that were already fighting running out of ammo and having to wait for the Germans to get close and then unloading with their last few machine gun rounds or saving their anti-tank weapons until they could ambush a German panzer. The idea that it was the commissars and the Soviets choosing to fight that way and it was a deliberate policy sent down from above is just a simplification, and it wasn't really accurate. Units would run out of ammo, and it was a problem getting ammo across the Volga, but the movie makes it seem like these commissars are just doing this on purpose, and that's how they were supposed to fight. But why is it there then? Well, they want to show that these commissars are really, really bad dudes, and they're really ruthless. This is important later. The film also depicts these ill-equipped men suicide charging at the entrenched Germans and getting mowed down wholesale. Now, while the Soviets were still developing their command and control and getting better at attacking, this human wave idea is a myth. The Germans in their accounts wrote about huge numbers of Soviets attacking and how they constantly felt outnumbered, and the Soviets were really fierce. And so over time, as historians picked this up and it worked its way into popular history, it's kind of become this human wave, death charge, ride or die type of idea. And it's a myth. Now, the Soviet accounts, and a lot of Soviet veterans will talk about, they didn't always have proper artillery before an attack, they didn't always have proper air cover, and attacks weren't always run well. They were often piecemeal, one unit would go in first, then another. But it wasn't a deliberate human wave, it was that the Soviets were still finding out their doctrine and trying to get better at fighting. And so, once again, weren't the Soviets just so ruthless? The movie's leaning on that again and again. After the ill-fated attack, we see the NKVD and blocking detachments ruthlessly machine-gunning retreating troops. Well, I guess someone had ammo, but it wasn't the men actually doing the attack. This is based on Order 227, nicknamed Not One Step Backwards, which did tell the Soviets in July 28, 1942, that they had to stop retreating. So, when the Germans launched Case Blue, the Soviets, not wanting to get encircled like Barbarossa, did retreat. A lot. It wasn't a deliberate policy, Stalin was never happy about it, but most of the smaller commanders at the division or the regiment, battalion level, sometimes men themselves, said, "Nope, I'm not getting surrounded by a panzer this time. I've learned my lesson." And they kept falling back, all the way across the Don Basin region. And to make them realize that as big as Russia is, they would have to stop eventually, Stalin did form blocking detachments and authorize the NKVD, which was basically the political secret police, to stop panic mongers, deserters, and traitors. These detachments did end up executing 13,500 soldiers, but this number is misleading. One, it was throughout the whole campaign and not just in the panic days of September. And two, it was across the entire Stalingrad front, which managed multiple armies and wasn't just the 62nd Army in the city itself. The Soviets never had enough men in the city due to building up their counterattack on the German flanks. So why would they just kill a division's worth of dudes when they needed more men? 13,500 men, that's a brand new division, and they needed those guys. Now, during a 2-day period in September, the NKVD did report that it detained 1,218 men, but out of those groups detained, 21 were shot, and they were shot publicly, and they were shot after, I wouldn't call it a trial, but accusations were leveled and they weighed it. And most of the men were sent back. So the goal really was to get men back in the fight, not gun down dudes that you desperately needed. The executions were public, and they weren't just a machine gun and, oh, they're retreating, time to gun them down. It would have been more accurate if those troops were gathered up and sent off to fight again. That was the goal, was to put men back in the fight. Now, this wasn't always back with their own units. Part of Order 227 did authorize special penal battalions, and if you were put in one of those, yeah, it wasn't very fun. They had such great jobs as clearing out minefields, taking entrenchments and strong points, and always being in the thick of the fighting. It often was a death sentence to be put in a penal battalion, but the penal battalions fought. They always performed a military task. It wasn't just soldiers getting gunned down for no reason. They wanted them to fight. The order was more for stopping huge retreats across large swaths of territory. The spirit of the order wasn't, oh, we're stopping an attack that's stupid anyway. Yeah, let's gun those guys down. So the movie really is leaning on these commissars. Look at their faces. They're cowards in the back, and they're going to gun down their troops because communism is evil and it's really harsh, and this is how the Soviets fight. Now, I'm not saying that blocking detachments weren't there or weren't well known. David Glantz makes a comment about the Volga and the blocking detachments being at the back of the men, and they knew it. But the film is playing this up to make a political point about the Soviet system, not to be true to history. I mean, even if they wanted to show the harshness of the Soviets, have a story about a penal battalion. Show a penal battalion. Show those men retreating, getting talked to or arrested. But to get machine gunned down like that, that's a real clear visual cue for the audience that, hey, these dudes are bad. This system is evil. And that's trying to make a point, but it's getting away from the history. After the failed attack, we see Commissar Danilov come up with a brilliant idea to focus on heroes for propaganda purposes, and that might work better with hope than putting guns at the back. And Nikita Khrushchev, gets impressed with this and the story of Vasily Zaitsev, and from then on the movie shows the propaganda as Zaitsev's legend builds. But isn't the film forgetting that it's trying to take shots at the USSR? You know, communists. You know, the people famous for, like, propaganda and propaganda posters and things like that. Back in July, the Soviets created the Order of Alexander Nevsky, who was a Russian hero who defeated the Teutonic Knights in the battle on the ice in 1242. So, they're already doing that. In July, months before this attack and this movie takes place, they realized, hey, why don't we name an order after a famous Russian who beat some Germans? And the whole point of the order was to have medals and find heroes and spread their stories. So it's not like the Russians didn't do propaganda, but the movie making it seem like Danilov just came up with the idea and blew everyone's minds. And oh my God, how come we didn't think of this before? Because they did. And it's accurate to say that there were men like Vasily Zaitsev and Yakov Pavlov, famous for Pavlov's house, the Strong Point, and Mikhail Panikaka, who were used for propaganda, and their stories were really widespread, and a lot of Soviet soldiers recounting the tale would talk about these men. But it wasn't a spontaneous thing thrown together in the middle of the fight. They already knew about this, and they had already been working on it, and as these heroes showed up, the Soviets were really quick to drop them in place. But I guess you have to have something for Danilov to do in the movie, so that's why that's there. In the end, the movie is just really making the point that communism is bad, and Zaitsev was used by the system and put in danger by the Soviets, and that his legend is why Major Koenig is sent to go and kill him. And so his entire safety, his well-being is put into threat by this system. But this framing leaves out so much of what made Stalingrad compelling. An army in retreat and disarray is changing how it fights, changing how it thinks, is holding on to turn a sure defeat into the Soviets' first crushing victory. Sniping was important, but it leaves out how the heroism and brilliance of using hard points and checkerboard defense in depth hold the Germans back. Things like moving in close so the German artillery and air advantage can't be used. It leaves out a lot of that heroism, a lot of that innovation, a lot of those changes. Because it's not trying to portray the Soviets in any sort of positive light. But by doing so, it takes out a lot of the individual men and commanders. People like Vasily Chuikov, who, he's not in the film, it focuses on Khrushchev, but Chuikov did a lot to move his headquarters on the west bank of the Volga and put it in harm's way, and to try to get more supplies to the common men and try to be on their side. And how a lot of Soviet accounts talk about the importance of connecting with the common soldier. It takes out those hero stories, and it takes out that human side of the battle. It just looks at superficial reasons that, Soviets had to fight because a totalitarian system told them to. And it's not asking actual veterans what they thought. Now, if you want to know more about the story, books I suggest would be the Stalingrad series by David M. Glantz. He goes incredibly detailed into where these units were and what they were doing. But I really like Michael K. Jones' Stalingrad, How the Red Army Triumphed. Because Jones digs in and looks at the changes the Red Army made, not just in fighting, but in thinking, and how they were able to hold on long enough in the city that the Soviets could build up and launch Operation Uranus to totally encircle the Sixth Army for Germany. He asks actual veterans, and he bases it on veterans' accounts and why they say they fought, not just Soviet propaganda or a reaction to Soviet propaganda like the movie is doing. Enemy at the Gates may get people interested in history and the Soviet side of the story, but it spends so much time making a political point that it misses the chance to tell the story of a defeated and beleaguered army reinventing itself and snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. It really misses the chance to do something bigger with what it has, and it's unfortunate because it's set in a place where not a lot of Western movies are set. But thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, if you learned something new, please leave a comment, like, or subscribe, and stay excited about history, and I will see you guys in the next video.